Welcome back. I went back and forth on whether or not to wear a team jersey for this, and I decided no, I'll wear my Neapolitan themed hockey guy jersey. And we're going to talk about the 9 most recent times that a Stanley Cup final has gone to Game 7. I would have gone back to the 10th, but that was before I was born, so I don't have any insight to provide on games that happened before I was born. I can try, but it's not gonna work. All right, so the most recent Game 7 was St. Louis and Boston back in 2019. And what was interesting with that one was everybody was favoring Boston going in, and Game 7 was in Boston. Boston was 2-1 away from home though. They were 1-3 at home. Their problem was they struggled to win at TD Garden. Boston won Game 6 in St. Louis by a score of 5-1. I remember a lot of talk about, hey, Boston's got this series. They're going home. They got the big win in St. Louis. And nope, St. Louis won that Stanley Cup. The Conn Smythe that year went to Ryan O'Reilly. There were other contenders for that, including Binnington. I was mildly surprised Binnington didn't get it, but O'Reilly gets it. The most recent Stanley Cup final before that was 2011. Boston going into Vancouver and winning 4-0. This was a series that was dominated by the home teams. Vancouver led 3-2 by virtue of the fact they were 3-0 at home. They were 0-2 on the road, and when they lost in Boston, it was in spectacular fashion. So each game in Vancouver was close, but each game in Boston wasn't. Game 6, Boston wins 5-2, and yeah, and then Boston wins in Vancouver 4-0. And it was pretty obvious pretty early on that Boston had brought their A game to Vancouver, and Vancouver was in some trouble. I think there was a crisis of confidence in Vancouver, and so they lose at home, and the Conn Smythe Trophy goes to Tim Thomas, who had his little back and forth with Roberto Luongo. Hey, these things happen. 2009, Detroit loses 2-1 against Pittsburgh. And what's interesting is the first three on this board, the home team loses Game 7 in those 3 games. The other 6 on the board, the home team wins Game 7. So it is rare overall to see a road team win a Game 7, but recently, not so much. So Detroit led the series 2-0. They also led the series 3-2. So Pittsburgh wins at home, and then Pittsburgh wins on the road in Game 7 by a score of 2-1. It is the only road game in the series Pittsburgh won. Detroit was 3-1 at home, but that one was the most important one. That was Game 7. So the Conn Smythe that year goes to Evgeny Malkin, a player who I think is one of the best players of his generation of hockey players. The Stanley Cup final that went to 7 games before that, 2006, Carolina and Edmonton. Edmonton's on this board 3 times, including the game we're going to see on Monday. Carolina led the series 3-1. Then Edmonton wins games 5 and 6. Carolina wins game 7 at home 3-1. And the Conn Smythe Trophy went to Cam Ward. Cam Ward took over as the starting goaltender during the playoffs and didn't look back and absolutely earned that Conn Smythe Trophy. At times, it felt like maybe he was a bit overrated by media and everything because of that Stanley Cup run. But when you win a Stanley Cup like that, it makes some sense that people would remember you quite fondly and bring up that Stanley Cup multiple times. 2004, so keeping in mind 2005, we didn't have a Stanley Cup winner because that whole season didn't happen. But 2004, Tampa Bay wins at home 2-1 over the Calgary Flames. Very controversial series, of course. Calgary led that series 2-1 and 3-2. Lost game 6 at home, controversial fashion. And then game 7, they lost in Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay was actually only 2-2 at home. They were better on the road than at home. And yet they win that game 7 just barely. And Brad Richards is the Conn Smythe Trophy winner for the Tampa Bay Lightning. The year before, 2003. So we have 3 Stanley Cups in a row that go to 7. We have 4 out of 5 that end up going to 7. So 2003, New Jersey wins at home 3-0. And at home was the most important thing of that playoff, at least of that series, because the home team won all 7 games. J.S. Shiger ends up winning the Conn Smythe. Yep. Losing team, yes, but J.S. Shiger, without his goaltending, Anaheim doesn't get anywhere near the Stanley Cup final. He was absolutely fantastic. Lights out goaltender. The shot of him being handed the Conn Smythe stands out to me, in my mind, because he doesn't look very happy having won it because his team just lost. So it has to be awkward winning the trophy for most valuable player of the playoffs when your team doesn't win in those playoffs. 2001, New Jersey's on the losing side of Game 7, and they're on the road in this case in Denver. Colorado wins 3-1. New Jersey led the series 3-2, couldn't close it out in Game 6 at home, so Colorado closes it out in Game 7 at home. The Avs were 2-2 at home in this series, so again, a team that struggled at home, pretty good on the road. They won 2 out of 3 on the road, the same as Tampa Bay had done in 2004. The Conn Smythe Trophy going to Patrick Roy. So in a matchup between Roy and Brodeur, Roy comes out ahead and ends up winning the Conn Smythe. Really strong finish to that series for Colorado to win their second ever Stanley Cup. 1994, the New York Rangers and the Vancouver Canucks, a series that wasn't supposed to go 7. And it doesn't feel the same as what we're seeing with the Oilers in Florida, but it's not completely off. When the Rangers led that series 3-1, my expectation was Vancouver would lose Game 5 in New York. They didn't. And then Vancouver didn't lose Game 6 at home, which is kind of what I was expecting as well. I had VHS tapes that had Games 5 and 6 on them, and the only title I had on it was The Miracle was what I put for Game 5, and The Miracle 2 was what I had for Game 6. Game 7, I didn't keep that one. The Rangers won that game 3-2, and I would watch those games too. Like, I don't have a VHS, I don't have those tapes anymore, but I did watch those. But yeah, Vancouver was 1-2 at home. The Rangers were 2-2 at home. So the road teams did pretty well in that series, but in the end, the Rangers win it at home by a score of 3-2. And Brian Leetch was the Conn Smythe Trophy winner that year. He played absolutely out of his mind throughout the playoffs. But both Kirk McLean and Mike Richter were fantastic in their respective runs too. You can almost every season make an argument for a goaltender for Conn Smythe. Which brings us to 1987, where a goaltender does win Conn Smythe, and again, it's a losing goaltender. So the Oilers win 3-1 in Game 7. Close game. The Oilers led that series 3-1. The Flyers put a little bit of doubt in them by winning Game 5 on the road and then winning Game 6 at home. But the Oilers were 3-1 at home. So they really asserted themselves at home in that Game 7. They were 1-2 away from home, so Philadelphia's pretty good at home. And the Conn Smythe Trophy that year went to Ron Hextall. Hextall had a fantastic run. Legendary at that point. What's interesting is the 1994 run by the Rangers started with them taking apart Hextall in the first round when he was with the New York Islanders. So just one of those oddities about the playoffs and all the cross-pollination that exists. But game 7, of course, is Monday for the Edmonton, Florida series. Florida led the series 3-0. They're 2-1 at home. They're 1-2 away from home. And if we're handing out a Conn Smythe, doesn't it go to Connor McDavid? McDavid would be the biggest star out of all the players on this board who've won a Stanley Cup, although you can make the argument for Patrick Roy. You can make the argument for Evgeny Malkin. And yeah, it's one of those things that it definitely cements your spot in history. Game 7s are the most dramatic event you can have in sports, I think. Other than maybe a World Cup final. A World Cup final can be absolutely, and I'm talking like soccer/European football. Those are absolutely awesome to watch too. But the Stanley Cup final, when it goes to 7, it's great. And so I've seen some people complain, it's been boring the last few games. Well, I'm guessing you cheer for Florida, or you just hate Edmonton. 5 of the last 9 Conn Smythe Trophy winners in a series that's gone 7 in the Stanley Cup final have gone to a goaltender. The only one that went to a defenseman is Brian Leetch right here. 3 times it went to a forward. I'm going to go ahead and say that if the Oilers win this, then McDavid's probably the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. If Bobrovsky comes out in Game 7 and plays an absolutely amazing game and makes like 35 saves and gets a shutout, then he probably wins it. Other than that, it may very well end up being Barkov, but it is a Stanley Cup final right now that there is no clear-cut favorite. Outside of McDavid, if the Oilers win, on the Florida side, I don't think there's a clear-cut favorite. It is, I think, between those two of Barkov and Bobrovsky, but it should be a lot of fun to watch. And it is the 3rd Game 7 for the Edmonton Oilers in a Stanley Cup final in their history. They are 1-1. It is the Florida Panthers' first Stanley Cup final Game 7 in their history. Of course, they got swept back in 1996, and last year they lost against Vegas. Vegas shunted them aside, and Vegas did win 4 in a row in that Stanley Cup final as well. So, will the Oilers do it? Will the Panthers do it? We will find out on Monday. Prior to that, I just wanted to take a look at other Stanley Cup finals that have gone to 7 games. So let me know your thoughts. What was your favorite of these, and what was your least favorite of these that went to 7? I have a feeling that I know which fan bases are going to vote for which. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.